Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Today I'd like to talk about the expectations we have of our political leaders and how we frame their legacies. I asked my good friend and former colleague from the Lindsay administration, Jay Kriegel, to join me. He's had a lengthy and diverse career in New York civic life, politics, and government. And welcome, I'm glad to have you here.
I'm delighted to be here. I don't know who the rest of the company is, but you are enough.
Oh, thank you very much. So are you. So, expectations.
They're high for in the beginning.
Certainly, our current mayor, we have high expectations.
Or
a certain part of the population has high expectations.
Which he helps to set very high, I think. Which I don't think is all bad.
No.
But I do think they tend to possibly overreach in terms of setting their own expectations.
And he's so different from his predecessor.
And
right?
That's a big part of it. And I think the city was ready for a change.
Yeah.
So we're ready for something different, but he's reacting to that by setting very high expectations in contrast.
Yeah. So we're already at work at changing Mayor Bloomberg's legacy. It's not even a year.
I guess he got a 7-month grace period before the Times decided to go after him.
Yeah, here was this businessman who was going to bring efficiency, right, productivity to the city. And the Times goes ahead and does a story about two of the major things that went way over budget and everything else. And what we're seeing is that maybe he wasn't such a good, was it manager? What?
Yeah, I think probably those are Nick's. I think the Bloomberg legacy will be relatively unchanged because I think legacy is largely about tone and values and personality. And I think Mike did set a standard of independence and for the mayoralty, which will continue in the future. And I think he will be well regarded for having done presided over a stable, growing city, taking us through a very difficult period with a very different style than Ed Koch's. So I think these are interesting stories, but I don't think they'll stick. Really.
They fit, though, when you think about it. Bloomberg and de Blasio, they're almost like a puzzle. Each one of them has a different part that together, if they only were together, they would be terrific, right?
Well, that's the magic of politics, right? We tend to go from one to another.
But we don't always fit together. I don't understand. I don't know why all of a sudden I have this vision. Here we have somebody who wanted this a strong civilian review board and wanted the inspector general who all of these things know stop and frisk, and then you had the guy who was managing. Anyway, it's all right.
Well, how do we compare Carter and Reagan as bookends?
It's true.
Probably a lot of contrast like that.
We were talking before. So legacies. I mean, are they? What is the connection between the expectations, then the reporting during a tenure, and I guess it comes to the press, and now especially with cable, doesn't that mix everything up? I mean, we're listening to people who sometimes I think, what am I listening to this person for? I know more than they do. What are they telling me?
Endless around-the-clock coverage, which unfortunately does diminish the impact of the press, the newspapers, the print press.
And then
but nonetheless, it's how people get their information, and everybody comes in with high expectations, doing it differently. Certainly.
Well, not everybody.
Oh, I
mean, we've elected people we've not had high expectations.
Give me an example.
A-beam.
Yes, we did, though that was by contrast. The city was ready for low expectations. Yes, I guess that was what the city wanted. But most public gets excited about someone new coming in unless they really can't handle it. And certainly de Blasio has ridden that kind of way with very strong pronouncements. I think he's had a very strong first 7 months. We'll see how it works out. A couple of big mistakes, but on balance. But I think what people ultimately want are strong leaders, and the most fatal thing, as evidenced by sad A-beam, is conveying the sense that you're not up to the job, that you're fundamentally weak, you can't manage whatever it is. And in contrast to that, Ed Koch obviously did the opposite. Mike Bloomberg, I think, was up to that challenge. We'll see how Bill de Blasio does. So far, okay, but it's very, very early to tell. Hasn't had the crises yet.
I didn't mean to single out Beam. I mean, I didn't have any expectations of Pataki. There are a lot of them. I don't have to do that. But I wonder about Obama. I mean, I worry about Obama. You know, I am a big Obama supporter.
Well, I think that the
This-
words I was just using describe, unfortunately, what seems to be happening
Right.
to Obama. That, and I'm a big fan, but whatever's happened on the issues, somehow it's all gotten away from him. He seems to have lost control of the events, and rather than managing the presidency, leading in any sense the country or the world, seems to be totally buffeted.
Well, but I think that's a misconception, because I think he's been unable to lead since he's got this Congress, where, you know, the minority leader of the Senate said the next 4 years we're going to get rid of him. How do you reconcile all of that?
Well, I think you do have to separate domestic affairs from international affairs. The domestically, in fact, I think his record is better and stronger, and we credit him for the fact that he's had to do that against a recalcitrant Congress. What they did on immigration is shameful, and a list of other things. But it's the recent turmoil internationally that has set the tone for the administration and created this terrible sense that the White House is just not up to what's going on.
Well, I don't. Do you have that sense?
I do, yeah.
You do?
I do. I do partly personally, partly because of what you see all around you, that the country feels lost right now and buffeted. Now, these are not easy events to control. No one can control them. But
They're not controllable, right.
But how you handle them, how you respond, what tone you set for the country. You know, in many ways, I think it went back to the setting the bright line in Syria. When you draw a line in Syria and then it's crossed and you don't do anything, you've got a terrible
So that was a
problem.
mistake.
I think it was a profound mistake, and I think it really cost the credibility of the presidency dramatically.
But I think Clinton's criticism is not. I mean, that was not a mistake.
Her statement was
The
not a
recent
mistake.
criticism about you, what it should have gone on, and then you should have done this, and you should have done that.
I think the fundamental point is that you have to give people a sense of strength and direction, that we know where we're going. We have a strategy plan. What she was saying is we've lost that sense. We seem buffeted from event to event. That doesn't say we could control any of these events, but having the
That, in
country
fact,
feel...
is the policy. Was we're no longer going to go in and intervene. We're no longer going to be, you know, the judge of what government you should have.
So we're not going to do anything stupid.
I know.
And, you know,
So let's go to somebody, a president who really you had no doubt about what he was doing in Vietnam, Lyndon Johnson,
right.
and his legacy.
Well, he's the most interesting case recently of an elected official whose legacy was so clearly dominated by the war and very skillfully. I don't know how much of it was managed by Joe Califano and a group of people who were there, but in 64 and 65, using the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Bills to create a second look at Johnson's legacy, not to go after the war issue, but to say whatever that is, everybody knows, but there is another side, and I think they've done brilliantly with that. Deservedly, Johnson deserves that credit. That's where we started. That's where I started in the 64, 65 acts, and Johnson is heroic, and all the timing of the play is perfect for those of us who've seen it, and it all tells a very different story about a commanding presence.
So legacies are flexible; they change over the times.
They can change. History always change. You know, General Grant, his legacy is different. Has changed. Some probably Lincoln's doesn't much change. Gets enhanced continually, but Johnson is the best recent. Well, Truman's legacy is the great example, probably, I guess, of someone who was belittled at the end, and partly David McCullough's book, but who's today revered in an odd way as a great president.
And Dwight Eisenhower.
Legacy.
Interesting enough, because the impression, you know, I went to college when he was the president of Columbia. We were not great fans, the students, or a lot of us. And he became president. And then you saw golfing and doing this and that. But when you look at it carefully, He did all right.
He
did well.
There's been a strong revisionism of Eisenhower, and justifiably so. And those are my first two campaigns, Stevenson against Eisenhower.
Yeah.
The country would be destroyed by having
Exactly.
Eisenhower.
Now
It would
we
be
look
terrible.
back.
Yeah.
So do we really trust history and historians? I mean, it is.
Well, I think what else do we
interesting.
have? I think it's important to get out of the moment and a process of looking back with greater reflection and information, taking a second look at people. But there are some things that won't change. I mean, we're even rebalancing the Johnson legacy doesn't change the feelings about the war. Trying to give Nixon his due in the last week, the anniversary of his resignation, about China and about some of the domestic problems, doesn't change Watergate and
Or
what
his
that represented,
personality.
which comes out in these tapes, which have just come out. So there are parts of it that don't change, but they get enriched and full. But the shorthand is probably continues.
The legacy that you've been most concerned with is our friend John Lindsay.
Aside from my personal legacy, right?
Is it personally? Well, that's still unwritten,
Yes.
thank goodness. We have great expectations from you. What about that?
Well, John Lindsay has clearly had a very unfavorable legacy for a number of reasons. He's been a target of the neocons. He's been branded as the end of the age of liberalism, the destruction of what liberalism can do, as well as on the civil rights issues, minority issues, having given away too much, all of which seems to me is very unbalanced and unfair. I think some things, to me, you can't fight about some things. The fact that after Lindsay, the city went into near bankruptcy is an established fact. Lindsay has some role in that culpability. How much of that, I'll let the historians can debate that. I don't see much purpose in debating it, but there's so much.
I think that should be debated, because that's always one of the things that is the strongest criticism, and I don't think it's a fair criticism.
But I think there's so much else, as in the Johnson case, that should be looked at. I think, to me, Lindsay was a man of, you and I share this, of great values, that he, in a time of extraordinary testing, unlike what any successor mayor has faced in terms of the fabric of the city and the society be ripped apart, John Lindsay understood what was needed, had the right values, and guided the city through that. And that, I think, is a phenomenal achievement for which he has been recognized but not fully credited.
He was, well, let's talk about this in more detail. I mean, he was considered to be almost like a gadfly. Is that fair enough to say?
No,
Limousine liberal, kind of, this and that. In fact, he was a very serious man. I don't know if people appreciate that. Fun city.
Yeah.
They picked up all these things.
Shorthands, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a very serious administration. The record
Right.
reflects enormous achievement, a lot of things that have reshaped the city.
The city's government still is kind of reflective of the agencies that he formed.
City's government still is very much an evolution of the structure that Lindsay put into place. Many of the innovative agencies that exist today were things that John Lindsay did and started. The third water tunnel, which has another 10 years to go, was started by us 50 years ago. So there's a whole list of things ways in which John Lindsay and zoning and planning and changing the face of the city, he created this innovative incentive zoning process, which continues to this day. So Lindsay's impact is pretty profound, I think, on the government and the life of the city, but not always overshadowed by this neocon criticism that he just bankrupted the city. So what we can do, I believe, most effectively is to open up another front, and that front, I think, primarily has two parts to it. One is what he did in holding the city together, which was symbolic about his walking the streets, but it's much, much deeper, as we both know. It's a very deep attention to the needs of a deprived minority community, which had been neglected, a lot of time out in these communities, a lot of resources into communities that had been neglected for a long time, and then policies, particularly policies with the police, which have an odd echo today. My favorite moment for John Lindsay, probably my proudest day, was in 1968 after Martin Luther King was killed, when the country's erupting. And in Chicago, Dick Daley, who was very much the great mayor, the old Dick Daley, who was very much the boss, a contrast to John Lindsay, issues an order after a night of looting, which says, effectively, it's considered a shoot-to-kill order, which says we're going to maintain law and order at any price. This is in the Nixon era, the Nixon election year, so Daley is echoing the Nixon law and order statement. John Lindsay, within 4 hours in New York, as that statement comes over the wire, puts out a statement saying we don't shoot children in New York City. And to me, that contrast was the contrast of what's going on in the country. Daley, Lindsay, Nixon, and we, to some extent, have those issues again today as to what's the proper, it's a two-part question. What's the proper use of police force and power, but also who is ultimately responsible for that? Lindsay was very clear that was the mayor's responsibility. Other mayors have not seen it that way. And it's yet to play out as to how de Blasio and Bratton will handle that.
It's interesting that these issues all refuse to settle down. They come back. I mean, look at the issues of today, abortion, well, the police, aside from the police, the whole thing is just there. Bloomberg was criticized for not relating to the communities of people of color. That was one side of his legacy.
I don't think it's that he didn't relate to those communities. He didn't
relate, not the city.
Yeah,
he personally.
But he came in following an administration that was perceived as having very harsh relations, and there was a calming of the temperature. I think that in the end there's a certain insensitivity, particularly on the police issues. The marijuana arrest situation is really horrendous and offensive, and should have been solved.
Well, the whole stop and frisk became the major issue in this last campaign. So now we've got the other thing, which is the broken windows or whatever, a different way of doing it, no?
An interesting debate. We're going to see how, which is fascinating to have in a society like this. But you're right, these issues, we were brought up in a world believing issues were linear, that you settled an issue and you moved on.
Yeah.
The New Deal was established.
Why did that happen? Is that from Roosevelt?
Why did it happen that things have suddenly become circular? I don't know. Starting with Ronald Reagan, and
did it start with Reagan?
Nothing is settled anymore. No
Nothing.
issues. These guys want to go back and redo everything, reopen every issue.
It's amazing.
So now some of this is that issues that seem settled otherwise, like the police issue. I thought that issue was settled. I thought the way you handled crowds and disturbances the police practice was done would be settled, and clearly that is not true.
Absolutely not.
So none of these issues.
And the whole question of urban life, which is what Lindsay, I thought, was one of his strongest points, was to raise the questions of what goes into urban life and what a plan for an urban community should be. I mean, he had a vision, which a lot of people don't have, and then really went out to articulate the needs of urban communities.
And he deserves credit for, even more broadly, the fact that this is an era that people were giving up on cities. Mm-hmm. The cities were deteriorating. The racial composition was changing dramatically. Whites were fleeing to the suburbs, blacks were taking over the cities, businesses were fleeing the cities. The whole suburban trend of Texaco and Mobile and IBM, everybody moving out into campuses, and these great campuses in the country. Who was going to be left? And I think by the end of the Lindsay administration, having nothing to do with us, there were very few defenders of cities. John Lindsay stood alone as the articulated fact that cities were the repository of our civilization. And they always have been, and they will be. And he was a voice for cities in the country when there was virtually nobody else, for investment in cities, but not just investment, for the fundamental importance of cities. And in that, he's been vindicated by time. That
now everybody's coming back in.
So the cycle has happened without anybody being responsible for it, without any government program. Cities have revived. It's not just New York, but it's happening every city that's got old factory buildings now suddenly has artist lofts.
Right.
Right. Everybody wants to live in a loft, which I do, and as you know, having married a painter, but it's a fantastic, fascinating trend. But that's the other side of a linear view of history. No one in the 70s or the 80s would have ever predicted what's going on in New York now in the year 2014, 15. But you know, if you look at the population of the city in the 20th century, this city of 8 million people, in fact, never reached 8 million people. There's never a census in the 20th century that says 8. We peak at 7.9, and then in 10 years we go back down to 7.1. Have this tremendous loss of people. And so since 1990, in 25 years, we've gone from 7 million people to 8.4, and the real crises in the city today, particularly about housing, are simple supply and demand. We've gained 1.4 million people. They're unlike the last great migration, which was largely poor people who got shunted aside in out-of-the-way areas. You couldn't see them in lousy housing. We're now talking about much more affluent, educated people who want good housing, and that's what's driving gentrification.
And this increasing, we seem to be paying much more attention to the disparity in the incomes. And
Well,
we seem to be getting much more international, don't we?
We should be paying attention to disparity, but one of the reasons for the disparity is not so much government policy as the extraordinary success of the city. The people who we've attracted, who are migrants coming in, a lot of kids the kids who always came are coming in much greater numbers today. Older people who are giving up their homes in the suburbs to move back into cities, and that traditional group of young affluents who, when they had 1 or 2 kids, would flee to the suburbs because of schools, who are now, they still flee, but they're staying in a much greater percentage. All of that's created a crisis.
And so many more people from different countries.
So
That's-
where do you find 1.4 housing for 1.4 million people when we're creating almost no housing by that standard? So what they do, they push other people out of their housing. That's the crisis.
It is. So what are we going to do?
Well, I think de Blasio
How do
gets.
you build affordable housing, other than by building them giant buildings?
It takes money one way or the other. You subsidize it by giving people the right to build much bigger buildings and put affordable housing.
I live on a block that has the 2 buildings that are being built. One is going to be the tallest residential building in the world, and the other is the densest apartment building in the city, 57th Street. Now,
Well, but unfortunately,
that's not an answer to affordable housing.
but those buildings don't have any affordable housing in them.
Yeah, they do. Well, I
No.
don't know about the tallest one.
There's no affordable housing.
It's a little bit, 20%,
I don't think
25%.
those-
That's the official housing policy in the city now.
Well, I'm not sure there's any escape from that, but it doesn't have to be the highest buildings. We're talking about going, this administration is talking about going to 10 areas like East New York and East Harlem, upzoning.
But they're
at
also
moder-
increasing density. in
Yes,
the
I'm
city,
saying upzoning,
in Manhattan too.
but at modest numbers compared to 57, 80 stories. But I think there's no escape from
Are
that.
they building that? Are people building that? They're not building that.
We're going to see. That's what their
Yeah.
policy is. Their
Yeah.
policy is going to be to do that. Look, I think Koch had an aggressive housing policy. Bloomberg had an aggressive housing policy. I think de Blasio gets credit for recognizing that right now that is maybe the crisis of the city, the lack of affordable housing, which is driving people out. The program they've put forward, which remains to be seen whether they can implement it, because I think we don't understand enough of it, but it's the right thing for us to be talking about as a city. It's the right issue.
How do we get, with some people having no money and other people having so much money, how can we never tap into those people who have so much money that are going to
Well,
help?
we do tap into it in a number of ways. We also have to be sensitive to the fact that just as maybe income disparities today are more pronounced, but mobility of people is also much greater. So that the number of people who own not just one home, but 2 or 3, who have planes and can put their residence where they want to, we've got to be sensitive to that mobility and the flexibility. We want people to continue to choose New York. But, for example,
But they don't. But people
the
who
mansion tax is an obvious example. Someone buys a unit for $50 to $90 million, taxing them on the purchase and on the sale of that unit, they're going to still buy that unit.
Exactly.
And so there's enormous revenue potential in that. I suspect this mayor's going to, there is a tax like that already. I think it's extremely low. I think it remains to be seen whether this mayor will tap
And
into
the
it.
threshold is low.
Yeah, the threshold, low.
So-
You know, it produces revenue, but I think there's
Yeah.
hundreds of millions of dollars. Our whole property tax system is screwed up.
Totally.
And I think this was been a failure of recent administrations not to be willing to deal with it. Yes, it's very toxic, but that's what you elect good people for.
And you can't just deal with it, can you, from the city? It involves the
It
state.
involves the state, but you have to explain to people that one of the great problems with income disparity is a lot of the wealthiest people, through no fault of their own, are dramatically underpaying real estate taxes compared to single-family homes. And we don't have to lower taxes, but we're leaving maybe as much as $1 billion on the table of taxes.
There also has to be a
people.
distinction between what we used to call upper middle class and upper class or high-end, higher incomes. I mean, you put everybody into the same category. So
Well,
people of modest,
we probably need 3 levels at the bottom and then maybe 5 to get to the
the
super
top, yeah.
international rate.
we
yeah.
also should say that it was under John Lindsay that we had a commuter tax, which could help us a little bit.
which should be replaced. It lasted for 39 years
Yeah.
without anybody ever complaining, and a terrible act of the legislature. Blames the mayor, but it never should have been taken
And here we
off.
come down to saying a
That,
lot
by
of
the way, is that's an easy $500 million a year. That since it's been taken off, the city's lost well over $5 to $6 billion.
So we'll have to discuss state governments and legacies of the governor's expectations also, because we've now seen, although we spend more time with cities, we've seen that we need the cooperation of the state.
But we have very low expectations of the governor because we don't know what the governor does.
That's
so
true.
governors, and there are a lot of governors, we have no idea what their legacy is because we don't know what they did.
Exactly. Well, we've come to the end.
Really?
Yes.
Did we settle anything?
No.
Oh, that's not the
Thank
purpose
you,
of
Jenny
politics.
Kriegel. Thank you.
My pleasure.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.